The night was thick with grief. In the dimly lit corridors of an animal shelter, a mournful sound pierced the silence, one that no one could ignore. Charlie, a once proud German shepherd, lay in a corner, his mighty form reduced to a quivering shell of its former self. His deep, gut-wrenching cries echoed through the shelter, reverberating off the walls. He had been here for days, restless and broken, as though the loss he carried inside him had seeped into every inch of his being. The shelter staff had grown weary from the endless sound. This wasn't just another animal in distress. It was a heart-wrenching story waiting to unfold. One evening, as the harsh fluorescent lights flickered above Dr. Scott found himself standing beside Charlie's kennel, gently reaching out to comfort the grieving dog. The usual bright eyes that had once sparkled with intelligence and loyalty now stared back at him, clouded with an overwhelming sorrow. It was as though Charlie was waiting for something or someone to make things right. Welcome to the HeartForce channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. The collar around Charlie's neck caught Dr. Scott's eye, and he bent closer to inspect it. He had seen this dog many times before, but this collar, this was something new. As his fingers traced over the leather, they landed on something strange, deliberate scratches beneath the current tag. The marking seemed out of place. Curiosity ignited, and with trembling hands, he examined the tag under the bright lights. What he uncovered sent a chill down his spine. "Oh my God," he whispered, for the first time in years. The experienced veterinarian felt a wave of uncertainty. This wasn't just about a lost dog or a grieving companion. No, this discovery, this revelation, was much deeper. It was a story of sacrifice, of guilt, and of a bond between two families that had been broken by fate and hidden for 6 long years. Charlie's howls grew louder, as though acknowledging that the truth was about to come to light. In the small town of Arlington, Virginia, the Carter family had once been a picture of success and compassion. Francis Carter, a highly respected cardiac surgeon, had dedicated his life to healing. His wife, Grace, a former concert pianist, had supported his career in their shared love of animal rescue. Their daughter, Sarah, was studying medicine, unaware that her family's story was about to be transformed in a way no one could have anticipated. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, in a modest townhouse, lived Emily Harrington. A trauma counselor by profession, Emily was no stranger to pain. Her life had been defined by loss, but it was one loss, one tragic night, that would forever bind her fate to Charlie's. 6 years ago, she had everything: a flourishing career, a beautiful home, and her beloved German shepherd. But one rainy October evening changed everything. An accident left her with a shattered heart and a terrible burden of guilt. It was a night that would haunt her forever. She had fled the scene, believing she had killed her dog. The truth, however, was far from what Emily imagined. The story of the accident, of Charlie's rescue, and of a choice made by a man who had dedicated his life to healing, would soon emerge. A story that would heal wounds and mend broken relationships in ways no one could have foreseen. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the Carter estate. Francis stood at the kitchen window, watching Charlie perform his morning patrol, an unwavering, meticulous routine. The once proud German shepherd, now graying and weathered, had earned Francis's trust, and in return, Charlie had become the heart of their home. That morning, however, something felt different. Francis had spent the previous night reviewing medical records, digging through decades of patient files. Among them was a name that caught his attention: Emily Harrington. The name belonged to the woman who had once been the driver in the accident that had changed everything. Francis knew he had to make a decision, but the weight of the truth was overwhelming. As the quiet morning turned to afternoon, the soft breeze carrying the scent of autumn through the open windows, Francis made a promise to Charlie. "I'll be back for our walk, old friend," he said. patting the dog's head. Little did either of them know this would be their last goodbye. Minutes later, the screech of tires shattered the stillness. Francis's car swerved sharply to avoid a child chasing a ball. The vehicle veered off course, directly into a massive oak tree. The impact was brutal, throwing Francis into unconsciousness. Charlie, sensing the gravity of the moment, sprang into action. The dog stood guard by Francis's side, refusing to leave even as paramedics rushed to help. Despite the frantic efforts of the medical team, Francis's condition worsened. In his last moments, he whispered one name to his wife, Grace, Emily. The shelter was eerily quiet as Grace arrived with Charlie 2 weeks after the funeral. It was as though the dog had absorbed every ounce of their shared grief, leaving him hollow, a ghost of the once joyful companion. He hadn't eaten in days, and his eyes, once full of life, now seemed clouded with a deep, unshakable sorrow. Grace had tried everything she could to comfort him, but she was losing hope. It felt like she was betraying Francis's memory by bringing Charlie to the shelter, but she had no choice. The dog needed more than she could offer. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered as she gently placed Charlie's belongings in a bag. His favorite toy, a blanket, a food bowl engraved with his name. Every item seemed to carry the weight of Francis's absence. But she had to let go. The decision was too hard to bear. As she reached for the leash, Charlie's head dropped, his tail wagging for the first time in days. It was as if he understood, as though he was waiting for something more than the shelter's cold walls. The Arlington Animal Shelter, a place of refuge for many animals, stood as a silent witness to the pain that had been carried through the Carter family. Dr. James Scott had seen countless cases of grief, but there was something different about Charlie. The dog's mourning wasn't just physical. It seemed to be a reflection of something deeper, something that in time would unravel in ways Dr. Scott could never have anticipated. When Grace handed over Charlie's collar, a sense of unease washed over Dr. Scott. The tag seemed wrong. It didn't belong to this dog, not entirely. Beneath the worn and scratched tag, a hidden inscription caught his attention. With trembling hands, Dr. Scott carefully examined the engraving. The discovery would send him on a journey that would bring 2 families together, a journey that would heal them all in ways they never thought possible. For Dr. Scott, this wasn't just another case. This was a story of healing, of redemption, and of love, a love that had endured 6 years of silence. And as Charlie's mournful cries echoed through the shelter, it became clear that the past had come to claim them all. 3 days after Charlie arrived at the shelter, the howls had stopped. The silence that followed was just as unsettling. Dr. Scott couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The dog had stopped crying, but his eyes, those sad, intelligent eyes, still held an unspoken plea. It was as though Charlie was waiting, almost as if he were sensing the unraveling of something larger than himself. Dr. Scott had spent countless hours reviewing Francis's notes on Charlie's condition. But it wasn't the medical charts that kept him up at night. It was the hidden message buried in the dog's collar. The inscription he had discovered that revealed a story so tangled. It seemed like a puzzle with pieces scattered across time. One late evening, while the shelter was quiet, Dr. Scott sat at his desk, reviewing Charlie's medical history for the umpteenth time. The gaps in the records intrigued him. There was a 6-year stretch between Charlie's last visits to the clinic and the time he was brought in by the Carters. A missing link, a mystery waiting to be solved. Charlie's constant howling had shifted from a cry of grief to something more urgent, more desperate. It was as if the dog knew the truth was on the verge of discovery. As the shadows of the night stretched long and the wind rattled the windows, Dr. Scott couldn't ignore the pull to investigate further. He needed to know. That's when the name appeared on his screen. Emily Harrington. The story began to take shape in a way that Dr. Scott hadn't expected. Emily had been a patient at the hospital where Francis had worked. Her son, Thomas, had been the care of Francis years ago. But there was more to the story, much more. The gaps were no longer mere coincidences. They were pieces of a puzzle that needed to be connected. Dr. Scott spent the rest of the night tracing Emily's name through the local veterinary records. As dawn approached, everything clicked into place. 6 years ago, Emily had posted missing dog posters all over Arlington, searching for a German shepherd named Charlie. The dates matched perfectly. The same Charlie, the same dog. Dr. Scott's hands shook as he leaned back in his chair. He had uncovered something that no one else knew, not even Grace. This wasn't just about a dog that had been lost and found. This was about two families connected by tragedy, a night that had forever altered the course of their lives. But why had Francis kept this a secret? Why hadn't he contacted Emily, let alone tell his wife, Grace, the truth? The answer had to lie in the letter Francis had mentioned in his final moments, the one he had entrusted to Grace to open only when the time was right. As the morning light began to stream through the window, Dr. Scott made a decision. He needed to confront Grace, to ask for her permission to pursue this investigation further. But there was a deeper question he needed to answer. How could he tell her the truth? The next morning, Grace walked into the shelter with a heavy heart. It had been a difficult few weeks since Francis's passing. She had tried to move forward, to heal, but she found herself stuck in the house, surrounded by memories of the man she had loved. Charlie, too, had become a reminder of everything she had lost. When Grace arrived at the shelter, Dr. Scott could see the sadness in her eyes, the deep well of grief that seemed to weigh on her every movement. It was clear that she had been struggling with her decision to bring Charlie here. But there was something else, something unspoken. I found this, Grace said, holding out the worn leather briefcase that had belonged to Francis. While I was cleaning his study, with trembling hands, she opened the briefcase, revealing a collection of photographs, medical documents, and a journal, Francis's personal journal. As Dr. Scott examined the documents, he found something that startled him. Among the pictures were photographs of a young boy, Thomas Harrington, and a dog, a German shepherd, Charlie. But it wasn't just the pictures that caught Dr. Scott's attention. It was the date stamps. These photos were from 6 years ago, the same time Charlie had disappeared. Grace watched Dr. Scott's reaction closely. "What is it?" she asked, her voice breaking with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Dr. Scott remained silent, his mind racing as he pieced the story together. Francis had been hiding the truth all along. He had known. He had known who Charlie belonged to. And he had known that Emily Harrington, the woman who had once posted missing dog flyers all over Arlington, had lost Charlie that night. Grace's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the photos. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he tell me the truth? Dr. Scott gently placed the photos aside and turned to face her. I believe Francis was protecting you, Grace. And Emily. And Charlie. He couldn't bear to tell you the truth because he knew how much it would hurt. But now, the truth was undeniable. Charlie's story was connected to Emily's, and the secrets that had kept them apart for so long were finally beginning to unravel. The next few days at the shelter were a blur. Grace couldn't stop thinking about the photos, the letter, and the weight of everything Francis had carried alone. As the hours passed, a mixture of disbelief and deep sadness settled in her heart. She couldn't fathom why Francis, a man so dedicated to healing, had chosen to keep this monumental secret. Dr. Scott had carefully read through the journal entries from Francis, and the picture they painted was clearer than ever. Francis had known the whole time. He had known who Charlie truly was, and he had made the difficult decision to hide that truth for the sake of Emily's healing, as well as for his own family's peace. The journal entries describe how Francis had found Charlie that fateful night, injured and alone. He had recognized the dog immediately, not just as any stray, but as Emily's beloved companion. But what really struck Dr. Scott was the sheer tenderness with which Francis had cared for Charlie, as if he knew that the dog was not just in need of physical healing, but emotional healing as well. And then there was Emily, the guilt that had haunted her for years, the search that had been fruitless, the overwhelming sense of failure. These were the burdens she had carried. Not knowing that Charlie had been right under her nose, cared for by the one man she had trusted to heal her son. But Emily had also unknowingly become a part of the story, a story she had no idea was unfolding around her. The morning after Grace had left the shelter, Dr. Scott sat alone in his office, staring at Charlie's collar. He had spent hours studying the photos, piecing together the history of Charlie's life, and now the truth was finally clear. Emily had been searching for her dog all these years, convinced he was lost forever. But Charlie wasn't lost. He had been cared for by Frances, hidden from her to protect her from the overwhelming guilt that would have torn her apart. Dr. Scott knew that the time had come to bring everything to light. The letter from Frances was clear. The truth could no longer be hidden. It was time to bring the families together. But it wasn't just about Charlie's health anymore. It was about healing wounds that had been buried for far too long. The drive to Emily's townhouse was long and quiet. Dr. Scott's heart raced as he neared her home. It had been years since he had seen her, since the night when her son had been in critical condition, and Frances had performed the surgery that saved his life. The weight of the history between them was heavy, but Dr. Scott knew that this was the only way forward. He parked in front of Emily's townhouse and walked up to the door, knocking softly. She answered quickly, her face pale and tired, but there was a hint of recognition in her eyes. "Dr. Scott, what's going on? Is Charlie?" She began, her voice shaking with anxiety. Dr. Scott held up his hand gently, stopping her. "It's about Charlie. I need to show you something." He handed her the leather briefcase that had once belonged to Frances. Emily hesitated, then took it from him, her fingers trembling as she opened it. She pulled out the journal, the photos, and the letters, each one a part of the story she had never known. "I don't understand," Emily whispered, her eyes scanning the pages. "Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't Frances tell me?" Dr. Scott looked at her, his voice soft but firm. "Frances knew Emily. He knew who Charlie was all along. He was protecting you, and he was protecting Charlie. He didn't want to hurt you, not after everything you had been through with your son. He thought that if you knew the truth, it would destroy you." Emily's hands shook as she turned the pages of the journal. Her eyes widened with each new revelation. "But he never told me. He was hiding him all these years." "Yes," Dr. Scott replied. "He kept Charlie's original identity a secret. He knew that if you found out the truth, it would destroy you. But now, the truth has to come to light. We can't keep hiding." Emily sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the weight of the discovery. "All these years, I've been looking for him, and he was right here. I could have had him back, but I didn't know. I didn't know he was safe." "I know," Dr. Scott said quietly. "But now we can make it right. Charlie has been waiting for this moment, too. It's time for healing for both you and Charlie." As they sat there, the doorbell rang. Dr. Scott turned to find Grace standing in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. "I think it's time," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. The drive to the veterinary hospital was a blur of emotions. Grace sat in the front seat, her hand resting on the seat next to her, while Emily sat behind, looking out the window, lost in thought. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the car, but there was also a sense of something else, a glimmer of hope. They arrived at the hospital, and as they entered the waiting room, they could see Charlie resting in a quiet corner. His once proud form was now diminished, but there was something different in his eyes, something that spoke of understanding, of knowing that the time had come for the families to be reunited. Dr. Scott stood by the door, watching them approach. He had seen many miracles in his years as a veterinarian, but this was something more. This wasn't just about treating a dog's physical wounds. This was about healing the deep emotional scars that had marked both families. As they approached Charlie, the dog lifted his head, his eyes locking with Emily's. For the first time in years, Charlie's tail gave a weak wag. The bond between them was undeniable. "You're here," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she knelt beside him. The moment Charlie's tail flicked gently, a subtle wave of relief passed through the room. Emily leaned closer, her hands trembling as she reached out to gently touch his fur. The weight of the last 6 years, the guilt, the searching, the unanswered questions, seemed to lift in that instant. She had found Charlie, but more than that, she had found a beginning of something much greater: redemption, healing, forgiveness. Grace stood beside her, her face etched with years of sorrow. Yet in her eyes was a quiet strength, This was the moment she had feared and longed for, the moment when the truth would break open the dam of grief and set them free. It wasn't just Charlie who needed healing, it was all of them. The pain they carried, the secrets they hid, could only be washed away by the truth. "Charlie," Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry." The tears she had never allowed herself to shed now flowed freely as she buried her face in the dog's fur. Charlie nudged her gently with his nose, as if to say, "It's okay." The dog who had once been lost and broken was now offering the kind of forgiveness that only animals seemed capable of, unconditional, unwavering. Dr. Scott watched quietly from the doorway, feeling the weight of the moment. He had seen many dogs come through his clinic, but none like Charlie. The German Shepherd wasn't just a patient. He was a bridge between families, between trauma and healing, between the past and the future. Charlie had witnessed it all, from the accident to the moments of loss and healing that had followed. And now, in this very room, he was helping mend the brokenness that had plagued them all. "I think he knows," Grace said softly, her voice cracking as she knelt beside Emily. "He knows we're finally together." Emily looked up, wiping her tears. "I never thought this day would come. I spent so many nights thinking I had failed him, thinking I had lost him forever. But here we are." She looked at Dr. Scott, then at Grace. "Thank you. Thank you for bringing us all together." Dr. Scott nodded. It was Francis's wish that this day would come. That's why he kept everything from you, to protect you. He knew the truth would be too much, but he also knew that eventually this would be the only way forward. The room was quiet, save for Charlie's steady breathing. The German Shepherd, despite his frail state, had shown the strength to carry his family's burdens. His spirit had endured the weight of loss, and now, together, they could start the journey of healing. Grace gently placed her hand on Emily's shoulder. "We've been given a second chance, haven't we?" "Yes," Emily replied, her voice filled with newfound resolve. "A second chance to make things right, to heal the past and move forward." They stood in silence for a long moment, each one processing the weight of their shared history. Charlie lay between them, his breathing steady, his tail thumping softly against the floor. In his quiet presence, they all found a sense of peace. Later that evening, after Charlie had been settled in his special room at the veterinary hospital, Grace and Emily sat together in the family room, surrounded by the photographs, letters, and medical files Francis had left behind. The silence that had once been filled with unspoken grief now seemed full of understanding. They were no longer just two women bound by a dog. They were two women bound by love, forgiveness, and a shared desire to heal. As Grace flipped through the journal, she found herself reading a passage Francis had written on the night of the accident. Love isn't just the bond between a man and his wife, or a parent and child. It's the force that carries us through the hardest times, that connects us even when we feel lost. It's the kind of love that mends broken hearts, even when we don't know how it works. I've seen it in Charlie's eyes. I've seen it in Emily's heart. And I know that one day, love will find its way back to all of us. Tears filled Grace's eyes as she looked at Emily. Francis knew. He always knew. "Yes," Emily whispered, wiping her tears. "He was preparing us all along." The story of Charlie is a story of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that hold us together. Even when we think we are broken, sometimes it takes years to unravel the secrets we hide from ourselves and each other. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, healing can begin. Charlie's journey is a reminder that no matter how lost we feel, no matter how broken our past may be, there is always a chance for redemption, forgiveness, and a second chance at love. What did you think of this story and the way love and healing brought these families back together? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the HeartForce channel for more inspirational stories about dogs that show us how powerful love and healing can truly be.